Hello, everybody. So, Ramadan Kareem to all. So, we are very happy to welcome all of our participants on Facebook as well as on Zoom platform to our Thursday English Without Borders webinar series. And we are very happy to host again. He's a man who is an incredible speaker and who shares really nice presentations and tips for teachers across the globe and working everywhere. And today we are very excited to introduce another webinar with Lisa. So under the title Teacher Creativity and Material Exploitation. And just to name some few of Lisa Mann's achievements. So Lisa Mann holds 2 master's degrees, one in teaching English to speakers of other languages, TESOL, and another in translation and localization. Lisa has enjoyed a long career in the field of applied linguistics and over the years has worked as an English language teacher, program director, teacher trainer, and translator in countries all over the world. And during her time in Peru, she worked with the Ministry of Education to develop the national curriculum for English for adult basic education under the country's English Gateway to the World initiative, and helped to create a cascading peer-to-peer teacher training program for English language teachers. On the other side of the world, in Uzbekistan, she served as an instructor and interim academic coordinator for Webster University's newly established MA TESOL program in Tashkent. She has worked as an English language specialist twice in Tajikistan to provide professional development and workshops to university and secondary school English language instructors. And she currently works as a training consultant, translator, translation professor, and editor in Spain. So welcome, Lisa.
Thank you.
Happy Eid to you. Yeah, and we are very happy to host you again. As usual, we are excited to see your presentation. And as today is Eid, we are expecting that people will be joining soon. And of course, we welcome any questions that participants might have from Facebook or on Zoom platform. So yeah, right now, I'm very happy to give the floor to you, and it's yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Nasiba. And thank you everyone for joining me, everyone who's here so far. I know this is a very important holiday for you, and I wish you a very happy holiday filled with love and family. And thank you again for coming today. If you have to leave early, these webinars are all recorded and will be available on the English Without Borders website, so you can check it out later if you need to go be with your family or prepare for your celebrations. So I'm just going to share my my PowerPoint with you. Okay, so can you see that? Does that look right, Nasiba? Yeah. Okay, so today, it's just 1 second here. So thanks again for welcoming me back to participate in this great series of webinars that English Without Borders is hosting. Today I'm going to be talking about ways to use your own ideas to enhance and expand upon the activities included in your textbook. The topic of my webinar today is teacher creativity and making the most of your materials. And we're going to explore ways to add creativity to your lessons by using Bloom's taxonomy as a roadmap, as a kind of a guide to help you think of ways to push beyond what's in your textbook. And then I'll share with you an example of how you can use the taxonomy to provide more opportunities for authentic practice for your students based on a textbook activity. And then I'll end by giving you some quick tips for creating more meaningful and thoughtful activities that will keep your students interested and engaged. And lastly, I'll share with you some resources and the references I used when I was making this webinar. But before we get started, I'd like to find a little bit out about you and who you teach. So we have a little poll for you just to find out. For the few people who are here, you could probably just tell me, but just I will launch a poll to see who are your students and how old are they? Who do you teach? I think we'll launch a poll. There we go. So just choose one of those answers. Who are you? Who do you teach? Who are your students? Now, in my experience as a teacher, now I mostly do teacher training and professional development. But in my many years as a teacher, I've taught all kinds of students, but mostly at university level, mostly adults, young adults, and business English. Although I've had a few classes of adolescents, a few classes of young learners. Okay, so 100% of our participants teach adolescents, mostly adolescents. So that's great. The information I'm going to share with you today is suitable for use with learners of any age and any level. So you'll see that it doesn't really matter who you teach. This is just mostly for me to know who your students are and who I'm talking to today. Okay, so I have another question for you, which is whether you use a textbook. And if you do use a textbook, how often do you adapt or expand the activities that are included in your textbook? Yeah, so first, just tell me, do you use a textbook? Now, some teachers don't want to use a textbook. Some teachers would prefer to create all of their own materials. But I believe in using a textbook. I think it adds structure to the course, and it allows the students to have everything in one place so they can go back and review what we've already done and take a look at what we're going to do next. Without losing their papers and, oh, teacher, I didn't bring my worksheet. And I think it's positive to use a textbook. Now, what about that second question? We all use textbooks. Now, do you change the activities and modify them or adapt them or add to them? Or do you just pretty much use exactly what's in the book? So just to tell me what you do there. Now, today, many of the English language textbooks have come so far in the last 10 or 15 years, and many of them contain really, really good, interesting, engaging activities. But still, they are made for audiences all over the world. So there's still some work to be done, I think, to contextualize those activities and make them more relevant for learners in your cultural and geographical situation. Okay, so we have our results from our two participants, and it says, one person says sometimes they change the activities in the book, add to the book if the students need more practice, and the other person says they often add to textbook activities in almost every lesson. Well, good. I'm glad that you both said that, because I hope that this will help you to give you a way to think about different ways to add to your textbook activities. Okay. So let's get started. Now, many of you probably already know about Bloom's taxonomy, but I'm going to give you a little bit of information for those of you who aren't familiar with it. So it was created in the 1950s by an educator called Benjamin Bloom as a way to conceptualize learning objectives. And learning objectives not just for English language learning, in fact, not specifically for English language learning at all, but for learning in general. And this was a time in the 1950s when a lot of changes were happening in what we understand about how people learn. The world of pedagogy was moving from an instructionist approach in which students sort of were expected to passively sit and learn from an expert teacher, from a master, to a constructivist approach, which is based on the idea that people gain knowledge and form meaning through experience, through doing things. And constructivism sees learning as an active social process and not as a passive process learned from a teacher, absorbed by a student. So in about 2001, Anderson and colleagues changed the taxonomy a little bit, and the revised version is what we're going to be working with today and what most people work with nowadays. They changed the order a little bit and added in creativity, which is a key part of what we're talking about today. The taxonomy is most often represented as a pyramid, and the bottom of the pyramid, the base of the pyramid, is remembering. So remembering skills remembering activities are those that require students to find or repeat words or facts. Yeah? And then above that one is understanding. And this is when students have to explain ideas or concepts or paraphrase or summarize to demonstrate that they've understood the input that you've given them. After that, above that is applying, and this is transferring information from one situation to another situation. In the English language classroom, we do a lot of applying activities because we integrate skills, we have integrated skills. So we take a text that we read, and then we use that information, we apply it, transfer it to a spoken conversation, for example. That's an example of an applying activity. Above applying is analyzing, and that's breaking information down into smaller parts and drawing connections between ideas. And above that is evaluating, and evaluating means weighing options and justifying choices. It means giving your opinion and critically thinking about what you think is correct and what you think is incorrect, what you think is right or wrong, what you think is the best and the worst. And at the very top of the pyramid, we have creating. And creating means combining parts of information that you're given, adding to it, changing it to produce something new, to create a new product. So this is Bloom's taxonomy, and it's often represented in this pyramid. But it's important to remember all of these when we're trying to think of ways to develop new activities to complement our textbook. The skills are arranged on the pyramid from what are called lower order thinking skills, or LOTS, on the bottom, to higher order thinking skills, or HOTS, on the top. Yeah. I'm sorry, I just have to move you so you're not in my way. So one thing that people often misunderstand about this taxonomy is that all of the skills are important, all of them. And just because some of these activities types require HOTS doesn't mean that the ones that required LOTS should be ignored. These activities at the bottom are essential. We need these, we need to remember, understand, and apply in order to be able to analyze, evaluate, and create. These types of activities provide scaffolding for these types of activities. Yeah, so they're all important. From here, these three provide the base for these three. But it's important not to just stop here, because these lower order thinking skills don't push our students to really learn. And if we think about learning as a social activity, these types of activities don't really require very much of that, right? So we're going to take a look at some of the types of activities we can do in each of these levels, and also the types of products that our students can generate at each level of the taxonomy. So at the base of the pyramid, we have the most basic of the skills in the taxonomy, which is remembering. And remembering activities require students to tell something, to list, to describe. Sometimes they have to locate something, they have to find something in a picture and write the name under it, label it. They might have to match two things or underline something. In the audiolingual approach, which you might know as one of the historical methods of teaching English, students listen to the teacher and repeat what she says. They listen and repeat. That's a remembering activity. It doesn't necessarily mean that they know what they're saying if they're just repeating. Yeah? I remember students of mine had the whole table of irregular verbs memorized, but did they know what each of those verbs meant? Sometimes they didn't. They just remembered the forms and they didn't know, they didn't understand the meanings, yeah? And that's the second skill in the pyramid, understanding. And these activities require students to do things like describe something or explain something, to give examples, to report, to summarize, to paraphrase. And students might produce things like a summary or an explanation or an example. They might show and tell. So for example, in total physical response, if the teacher says, Firuz, go to the door and knock 3 times. Well, if Firuz stands up, goes to the door and knock 3 times, he has showed you that he has understood that command. Yeah, so that's demonstrating understanding. And the third one on sort of the lower end of the pyramid is applying, and which is transferring information from one situation to another. And these are common activity types in English language teaching. They are things like transfer to another skill. So take something that was in writing and talk about it, or read something and then write about it, or demonstrate something or change something. And the types of products that result from these activities are things like illustrations, demonstrations, interviews, performances, journals, yeah? Okay, just fix something here. All right, so those were the ones that are on the base of the pyramid. They're the lower order thinking skills. Now let's look at the top, at the higher order skills. Analyzing, remember, means breaking information down into smaller parts in order to better understand it. And analyzing activities include things like categorizing, classifying, organizing, solving, writing a survey. And they result in products like graphs, and mind maps, and checklists, outlines, timelines, and surveys. Evaluating means making some kind of judgment. It's about considering different options and giving opinions. And activities include ranking and defending, criticizing, prioritizing, and they result in products like plans, reports, conclusions, debates, critiques, yeah? And lastly, creating, which is using one's imagination to make something new. And that's at the very tippy top of the pyramid. Creative activities are things like acting and assembling, constructing, designing, developing, improving, inventing, and they result in products like pieces of art and new games, projects, plans, advertisements, and stories. Okay. So at the end of this webinar, I'll give you a link to a document that has lots of different verbs you can use to think about these different levels of Bloom's taxonomy, and as well as different kinds of products that your students can generate at each level. Now let's look at a typical textbook activity and analyze what types of skills on the Bloom's taxonomy it requires. Now, this is a textbook activity from American Headway, which is a book used throughout the world, and I know it's very popular in Central Asia. And it's a solid book. It has good, good activities and good material, and it provides a really nice structure to follow if you're doing a long academic year-long course. So this is taken from a lesson on nationalities and countries. And in the lead-in, which isn't shown here, the students have to match different flags to different countries. And then in this first activity, they have to complete these texts about 3 different countries using the words in the boxes here. Yeah. And then they have to match each text to one of the flags, which aren't shown here, and to one of the pictures, which aren't shown here either. So what kind of activity do you think this is? Do you think this activity requires students to remember, to understand, to apply, to analyze, to evaluate, or to create? What do you think? You can just type your answer in the chat. What do you think, everyone? Is this, what kind of activity is this? Remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, or creating? You know, we don't have very many people here to type your answers in. Nurali says creating. What do they have to create here, Nurali? And Nasiba says understanding. I agree with you, Nasiba. I think that this is an understanding type activity. Why? Well, because the students have to read these texts and they have to understand them in order to be able to put the word in the appropriate spot. They have to understand what these words mean. They have to understand the general idea of these texts, and they have to know where to put those. So this is an understanding type activity. The second part, the second activity is that they have to listen to people talking about their countries, and then they have to match each speaker to the photo of the country they're from. So they listen to 3 speakers, the people describe their countries, and then they have to match them to the photos, which aren't shown here. So what kind of skill do you think this is? Listen to the people describing their country and then match to the photos. So remember, our choices are remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, or creating. What do you think? Applying, says Ali John. That's possible. Well, I think that this, oh, we have another answer there. Analyzing, Nasiba. Why do you think it's analyzing? I think this is a understanding activity. Why? Well, because they have to understand what they're listening to and then match, just make a connection between, in general, what the person says and the picture that they see. Now, do they have to understand very much? Probably not. If they could just understand a few words, they can make that connection maybe between one and the other. And Nurali says, remembering, not remembering. Well, there's a certain amount of remembering required as well, right? Because they have to listen, remember. Nobody says they can take notes. Listen, remember, and then make the connection. So remembering, understanding, yeah. The next activity here says, close your books. Can you remember 3 facts about each country? Tell a partner. Now this one is pretty easy. Is it remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, or creating? What do you think? Close your books. Can you remember 3 facts? Well, I think it's pretty clear. Let's see. Remembering, yes, exactly, good. This one is clear. It says, even says remembering in, in the instructions themselves. So the students have to do nothing more than just remember what they heard or what they've read. And the last one says, give some similar facts about your own country. And which one is that, do you think? Is that, I keep saying, remember, is that remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, or creating. So Rowley, you keep saying creating, and I'm wondering why you think that's creating. What do they have to create there? They don't have to make anything. They don't produce anything. The creating, remember, is making something new. I think this is not creating. I think this is applying. This is taking information about, given information about one situation or several different countries, and applying it to their own situation, their own lives, and their own experiences. So I would say that one is applying. Yeah. You say because they can say something that is not in the book. Well, creating is much more than that. Applying is very often not in the book. It's applying something to your own life experience, for example, applying something from one skill to another. That's also not in the book. Creating is much more than that, and we'll see that in just a moment. Yeah, let's see what creating looks like. So you see, this kind of typical textbook activity lays the foundation for more creative work, but it doesn't quite get there. So if you wanted your students to practice a bit more with this topic or with this grammar focus, which is the present tenses, you would work from this starting point. This is good scaffolding. This is a great foundation on which to build more and more interesting and more engaging and more thought-provoking activities. And you can use Bloom's taxonomy as a guide to doing that. So let's give that a try. We'll see what that would look like. All right. Oops. Okay. So you remember that the last little task in the textbook activity about countries and nationalities said, tell your partner some facts about your country. Now, this is a potentially rich topic, but it's not been fully exploited in the textbook. And there are lots of reasons for that, I imagine. That maybe the textbook authors didn't want to go very deep into this at this moment. Maybe this is just a review. There are any number of reasons why the textbook authors decided to end that segment of the textbook at that moment. But you might want to, as the teacher, to expand upon it. So I'm going to show you a series of activities based on that relatively short textbook activity. Now, those of you familiar with task-based learning will recognize this as a full task cycle. I won't talk about task-based learning much today. That'll be another webinar, I imagine. And the activity here, the activities I present to you are going to be in the form of the instructions to the students. So for example, in your group, brainstorm all of the most important information about your country, its population, its size, its capital, major products, government system, regions, etc. Try to think of as much information as possible and organize it into categories. For example, people, land, government, history, etc. It's okay if you just have to guess now and then find the real answers later. Just put a question mark next to the information you're not sure about. Okay, so because the textbook provided such a solid base for us to start talking about our own country, and I'm using Tajikistan as an example here, we can just start moving right up the pyramid and start away with an analyzing task where the students have to break down the information about their country into different categories, like people, land, government, and history. That's an analytical task. So already we're starting to move into higher order thinking just from the first task. Now, these are the instructions for the students, remember. Now choose 5 of the facts you wrote down about your country that you think most people know, and 5 facts that you think most people don't know. And now we're pushing the students' thinking skills a little higher up that pyramid by practicing, while they're practicing real, authentic English. So here they have to evaluate. They have to use their judgments. They have to speculate. They have to give opinions. agree and disagree, and reach a decision. Now, this is a complex task, and you might want to write a few of expressions that they might need to complete the task on the board. But as long as they are communicating in English, you shouldn't worry much about their accuracy. The point is they are socializing with each other, they're working as a group, they're cooperating, and they are communicating to reach a goal. And the goal here is to communicate, to say what's on their mind, and also to evaluate and reach and to narrow down that information they generated in the first task. Now, students will be, these types of activities and task-based learning in general, students will be tempted to speak their first language. So that's something you have to be aware of, and just say, I'm glad you're so excited about this task, about this activity, but please speak English. And you really have to insist and go around, come on guys, in English, please, because they will get excited about it and try to speak in their first language. Quite common in these types of activities. But that's not the activity is just a means for them to practice their English. The point is not to create a survey. The point is them to practice English through the creation of a survey. So that's important. So now we start preparing to create, which is at the top of that pyramid, through applying the information generated in the last step to the creation of a survey. So the instructions to the students are now with your group, write multiple choice questions about the 10 facts you've chosen. For example, how many people live in Tajikistan? About 7.2 million, about 5 million, about 9.3 million, about 13 million. Make sure you find out the correct answers on the internet, in the library, or by asking someone who knows. And each student will need a copy of the questions in each group. Yeah. So here we've got them applying, first of all, information from before into a new format. They're starting to create, but there's also this analysis step where they have to do a little research and to find the correct information for their surveys, either online or at the library, or by asking somebody who has more knowledge than they do. By the way, what do you think is the answer to this question? How many people live in Tajikistan? What do you think? You can just type your answer in the chat. Let's see what you say. Alijan says 9.3, and Hasiba says 9.3, and Nurali says 9.32. Yes, all right, good. You know about your country. They're 9.3. I had to look that up, obviously. Tajikistan is not my country, but you guessed correct. You knew this. You knew this correctly. Good job. Okay, so now we have the students are making a questionnaire. They're making a survey, and the next step is to ask people their questions. So the instructions to the students are, before next week, each person in your group should ask 3 to 5 people the questions and record their answers. You can ask students from other classes, teachers, friends, or families. So when they're asking people their questions, they're also applying the questions that they wrote to other skills, to speaking and to listening, and applying also the abstract to the concrete by asking real people about their real knowledge. And they need to ask, and if they need to ask people in their first language, because they can't find enough people who speak English, they can also do that and just write down their answers in English. And then they're also applying because they're transferring knowledge from one language to another. Yeah. So this is also higher up on that pyramid, this part of the task. Okay. The next step is, now that you've collected your data, work with your group to decide what information to include and create a bar graph showing your findings. Now, so by deciding what information to include and how to include it, they're analyzing, they're evaluating, and then they're creating when they make this actual graph. Now, this is a super rich activity that involves lots of authentic interaction and higher order thinking skills. Prepare to present your findings to the class. Everyone must contribute during the presentation. Listen to other groups' presentations and take notes. Are their findings very different from yours? So the presentation of their findings makes them apply what they've written to a new situation, which is the presentation itself. While listening to other groups' information and comparing it to their own requires them to analyze and to evaluate. And it also gives you, the teacher, a chance to hear and assess their English when they've had a chance to prepare and to practice. This gives you a clearer idea of the gaps in their knowledge. For example, if they leave off the third person S in conversation, it might just be a simple slip of the tongue. It might just be a little mistake. But if they consistently leave off the S in careful speech during their presentation, you know that this is something that they truly don't know and that you need to address in class. Finally, there's a whole class discussion, which serves to wrap everything up, evaluate, and give opinions. So, for example, in general, do people know a lot about our country? Is it important to know a lot of facts about the country you live in? Why or why not? How can we improve people's knowledge of our country? So if you wanted to push this this very long series of tasks, right? So we've gone over one class length by far. This is a series of tasks taken from that little tiny activity at the in the headway. We've created this long series of tasks with higher order thinking skills, and we could push it even further by asking our students to create some kind of awareness raising campaign. So this could be something like a blog or a website or posters with facts about Tajikistan that they hang in their school or that they hang in their village or that they hang at the market to try to inform the citizens of Tajikistan or the citizens of their town or their city or their village about the facts about their country. The important thing about this creating step, this last really very creative part, is that they have some choice in what kind of campaign they create and how they present the information. So here are all the steps in that task cycle that I just showed you. And so you'll see the textbook gave us these three levels, right? The textbook gave us remembering, understanding, and applying. And we pushed it on up all the way to the top. So now that little activity that was just these very basic skills contains all of these skills, from the most simple skills to the most complex. Yeah? And this isn't dependent necessarily on language level or language ability. You can alter these the requirements of each of these steps to match what your students are capable of doing. So in the end, what we've got is a student-led, student-centered, engaging, meaningful, and authentic task cycle. A German researcher named Kurt studied German learners in 2010, and he found that learners participate actively, creatively, and autonomously when the teacher just sets up the scenario, sets up the conditions, and the students direct the use of their language. So the teacher isn't controlling them, they control what they have to say, what they need to say. So in addition to the content of each of these stages of the task, how you manage the classroom in these tasks, how you giving the students freedom to make choices, to make decisions, also adds to the creativity of the task. So I just showed you a task cycle that would give your students hours and hours of fantastic practice, but sometimes you just want a quick little addition to a textbook activity. And here I'll just share with you a few suggestions. So first of all, getting your students to get up and move around always adds memorability to a lesson. You might give students the different sentences or pictures and ask them to stand in order to make a logical story. Or you can ask them to move around and stand in order to make human graphic organizers, like timelines. Or you can place, for example, a green sign on one end of a wall and a red sign on the other end of the wall, and use these to have students give their opinions in a spectrum from strongly agree to strongly disagree. So you can leave these signs up the whole year and use them again and again. You can say, for example, I thought that was a great story. And the kids who think that that was a great story, they get to stand over here in the green section. And the kids who thought the story was terrible stand in the red section. And the kids who thought it was okay just kind of stand in the middle. You could say, you could test the content, their understanding of the content or their beliefs about the content by saying something like, the main character in the story was a good person. And then the students who thought he was a good person can stand over here. The people who thought he was a bad person can stand over here. And the people who thought he had both good and bad characteristics can stand in the middle. You can say, I would rather read the story silently and individually. And then students can give their opinion about how they'd like to interact with the material. You could say, I would like to hear the teacher read the story. And then students who want to hear the teacher can stand over here. And you can get a quick idea of how your students in general, how most of them would like to interact with the materials you're working with. This gives them the ability to express an opinion, and that's evaluating, to evaluate and come to conclusions. And in the case of my last two examples, it gives them some freedom of choice. And students, when they feel that they have some freedom of choice, feel better about the learning situation and the learning context, and it promotes their autonomy as learners and allows them to continue learning both inside and outside the class. Okay, so ending chapters or modules or units with some kind of project or product also ensures that you're including some type of creativity in your lessons. And one way to do that is to contextualize textbook topics in your local culture, personalizing what's in the book to what your reality is in your teaching context. So instead of just writing a simple postcard, you could ask your students to create a real postcard on a piece of card and draw a picture of something interesting in their town or city on one side. On the other side, write in English a little postcard describing an activity or an experience to a friend. And they can even mail that real postcard to a student in their class or in another class at their school. That's a real authentic task that has several parts, and it promotes pride in where they're from and who they are. It connects to their own lives and their own experiences. They practice their English. Writing a simple postcard is one of the descriptors on the SEFR, so that's something that is a valuable skill to have. And it's fun. They get to receive a postcard from somebody at school. How fun is that? Instead of learning directions with an imaginary map of an imaginary town in the book, you can ask your students to draw accurate maps of their neighborhoods. This is not something they need to look on Google Maps or anything to find. They know what their neighborhood looks like. They know the streets that are around their house and the landmarks that are around their houses. They draw those maps and then they give each other directions from one place to another. And instead of a dialogue at an imaginary shop, you can change the shop name to one that everyone knows and that products to things that our students are familiar with. In these big international English language textbooks, they're often the examples are often at a giant British supermarket or a big American supermarket, which might not be very relevant or recognizable to students who live in a little village in Tajikistan. So if you change that to something that is personalized and contextualized, it'll be more memorable and interesting for your students. And they can change it themselves as well. You can also modify the input provided in the textbook by asking students to use their imaginations to change certain elements of stories and texts. For example, they can change the ending of a story to make it to however they want. They can do that individually or in pairs and then share their answers with each other. They can change one of the characters from a human character to an animal character. They can change where the story takes place. So if there is a story that takes place in San Francisco, they can change it to take place in Dushanbe, for example. And then they have to change all of the different setting elements in that story as well to contextualize it in Tajikistan. Can change the point of view. So instead of the story being written in the third person, they can change the point of view to the first person, written from the point of view of the main character, or vice versa. They can transform the story into a play and then act it out. And that is a multi-stage activity that requires all kinds of really, really good thinking skills, all kinds of really important linguistic skills as well. Okay, and in this digital age, if it's possible, it's well worth asking students to use their phones to video or audio record themselves doing things with English outside of class. And this could be something like singing a song or playing a game. It could be performing a role play, reciting a poem, or describing their surroundings. Just sort of giving a tour of their village, a tour of their school, and being the host to an imaginary audience. These types of activities are memorable, meaningful, they're personalized, and they encourage our learners to experiment and play with the language outside of class. Yeah. Interviewing a classmate, I forgot to put that one on there, interviewing a classmate as well. So using their phones just adds this extra element of interest for our students. They love everything technological, so why not take advantage of that? And they can share these things with their peers via WhatsApp or Telegram, or they can send them to you by email if they're shy to share them with their peers. But these are the kinds of things that kids like to do. So why not combine them with English learning and allow them to be creative with their phones. So just to sum up, if you want to do more with a topic or you want to expand on a language focus, you think your students need more practice with something, it's a good idea to start by looking at the book and see what you've already got, what kind of base you've already got, and then use Bloom's taxonomy to generate ideas that build on that base and add to that base with additional, more interesting and engaging tasks. Because as you move up that pyramid, your activities become more learner-centered and more engaging and more creative. Yeah. As we saw, one short textbook activity can give rise to hours and hours of meaningful practice. And that's what every teacher, what teachers need. They need meaningful practice opportunities, meaningful ways to get our students to practice. And lastly, making higher order thinking skills a regular part of your lessons not only makes your language class more interesting, but it benefits your students in lots of different ways. These are transversal skills. That means they are applicable in the English language class, but also in the math class, in the science class, in the history class, and in our lives themselves, because it teaches us how to think more critically, how to evaluate, how to analyze, and how to innovate. And those are important parts of everyone's life, both personal and professional. Okay, that's it. I hope you enjoyed. These are the resources and references that I wanted to point out. Especially, I wanted to point out this book called Creativity in the English Language Classroom, which is published by the British Council. This is a free downloadable book, and it's just packed with really nice creative activities. It's got some theory in there as well, but it mostly contains just activity after activity for creative English language classrooms. So I encourage you to look that up on the internet, and you'll get to a British Council page and you'll see the link there, and you can just click it and download the PDF. Yeah, it's free and usable by everyone. So that is all I have for you. I hope you enjoy this. Here's some questions. Here are ideas, thoughts, and questions, and Nasiba has one. How about writing a journal in English by students? How useful can it be for language learning, and how often do you use it? Well, lots of teachers use journals for language learning, and it's sort of what I think the most beneficial thing about journals is that the students have a chance to write without really much direction. So they're just writing about their day, what they did today, what they liked, and they're writing about their true interests. And as language learners, if you want to give them feedback on their language, you can, but I think it's just a nice way to get them to think in English, to start to reflect in English, and to start to apply the grammar and vocabulary that they've learned in the class in a way that's very personal and very authentic, right? Because people write in journals in their first language. By meaningful practices, what do you mean in adult online classes? I'm not sure what you mean there. What do you mean in adult online classes? Many of these activities that I showed you today, you could do in an online class. The task cycle could be done online if you have breakout rooms. Yeah, all of those can be done online. And in fact, the research part, the graph part, those are both things that can be done with a computer. It might, in fact, be more suited to an online class than to a face-to-face class, that whole task series, because they can work with partners in a breakout room, look for information online, create a clean Word document or even a Google form as a survey. I think that's easily transferable to an online course. What activities do you find very useful to boost students' creativity? Well, those ones I just showed you, these ones, for example, where students are asked, you ask students to change something about something they're reading. They get very creative that way. And also, if you give them just a little bit of input, just some pictures, just some keywords, and ask them to take it from there and to create something, create a story, or create a comic, or create a drawing. Those are all really good ways as well. But what I'm mainly focusing on today is how can you take something from the textbook and turn that in from a sort of boring textbook reading into something creative. And you can do that by asking them to modify it, but to change it in some way. The first activity I talked about, basically, how long does it take to conduct it? Well, it depends a little bit on what level your students are and what you're expecting them to do. But each of the steps takes quite a long time. And that's the thing about task-based learning, is that it takes a long time, but they're talking the whole time. So that whole series of tasks that I do, I probably need 2 or 3 sessions, 2 or 3 50-minute sessions to complete it, because each time they're creating something else, each time they're doing a separate part, and you're just continuing with it. Now, you could just take parts of it and not do the whole sequence. Yeah, you could eliminate the presentation at the end, for example. That would cut some time off. You could eliminate some of the parts and just make it shorter. But I like that long task. I like that long task cycle where the students really get in depth into one thing and they really produce something that they really feel proud of and that they've really worked hard on. Any other questions? And back here.
Yeah, tons of thanks to you, Lisa. Like, you know, for such a nice presentation, very interesting, very engaging. So I do hope that, you know, people who will be watching the recordings, they will also enjoy your presentation.
I hope so too.
Yeah, just, you know, I gained a lot today by watching it and then listening to your tips which you shared. That's really incredible. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Lisa. Yeah, thanks a lot, like for your energy, for being a volunteer with English Without Borders. We really appreciate your time, effort, and of course, like, you know, your commitment to teaching. And you are doing such an incredible job by sharing your teaching experience and knowledge across the globe. Like, you know, it's a huge resource. You are a huge resource yourself. And thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.